The cattle of the sun god. Odysseus urges his exhausted crew to bypass the Thrinacia, the island of the sun god, Helios. But the men insist on landing. Odysseus makes them swear not to touch the god's cattle. Odysseus is still speaking. So he's still speaking to Alcinous's court. In the small hours of the third watch, when stars that shone out in the first dusk of evening had gone down to their setting, a giant wind blew from heaven, and clouds driven by Zeus shrouded land and sea in a night of storm. So just as dawn, with fingertips of rose, touched the windy world, we dragged our ship to cover in a grotto, a sea cave, where nymphs had chairs of rock and sanded floors. I mustered all the crew and said, "Old shipmates, our stores are in the ship's hold, food and drink. The cattle here are not for our provision, or we pay dearly for it. So eat all the food on the ship, drink everything on the ship that you want to, but don't touch the cattle. They're not for us to eat." Fierce the god is who cherishes these heifers and these sheep, Helios, and no man avoids his eye. To this my fighters nodded. Yes, but now we had a month of onshore gales blowing day in, day out, south winds or south by east. As long as bread and good wine remained to keep the men up and appease their craving, they would not touch the cattle. But in the end, when all the barley in the ship was gone, hunger drove them to scour the wild shore with angling hooks for fishes and seafowl, whatever fell into their hands, and lean days were their bellies thin. So they're suffering over a month of onshore gales or sea storms. And eventually they're eating all the provisions on their ship and running out. The storms continued, so one day I withdrew to the interior to pray the gods in solitude for hope that one might show me some way of salvation. Slipping away, I struck across the island to a sheltered spot out of the driving gale. I washed my hands there and made supplication to the gods who own Olympus, all the gods, but they, for answer, only closed my eyes under slow drops of sleep. Now, on the shore, Eurycles made his insidious plea. So Eurycles is the officer that originally went to fetch Odysseus to save the men from Circe. So now he's the one that is hatching an insidious plea, or sort of a sinister plot. He's coming up with a plan. "Comrades," he said, "you've gone through everything. Listen to what I say. All deaths are hateful to us, mortal wretches, but famine is the most pitiful, the worst end that a man can come to. All death is terrible and we hate it, but the worst is starving to death. Will you fight it? Come, we'll cut out the noblest of these cattle for sacrifice to the gods who own the sky. And once at home in the old country of Ithaca, if ever that day comes, we'll build a costly temple and adorn it with every beauty for the Lord of Noom. So we're going to sacrifice the cows and consume them. We're not going to ask, but to make up for it, we'll build a nice shiny temple for them. But if he flares up over his heifer's loss, wishing our ship destroyed, and if the gods make cause with him, why then I say, better open your lungs to a big sea once for all than waste his skin and bones on a lonely island. If we're going to die, let it happen at once, instead of slowly starving to death." Thus Eurycles and they murmured I, trooping away at once to round up heifers. Now the day tranquil cattle with broad brows were grazing near, and soon the men drew up around their chosen beasts in ceremony. They plucked the leaves that shone on a tall oak, having no barley meal to strown the victims, performed the prayers and ritual, knifed the kine or cows, and flayed each carcass, cutting thigh bones free to wrap in double folds of fat. These offerings with strips of meat were laid upon the fire. Then, as they had no wine, they made libation with clear spring water, broiling the entrails first, and when the bones were burnt and tripes shared, they spitted the carved meat. Just then my slumber left me in a rush. My eyes opened, and I went down to the seaward path. No sooner had I caught sight of our black hull than savory odors of burnt fat ebbed around me. Grief took hold of me, and I cried aloud. "O Father Zeus, and gods in bliss forever, you made me sleep away this day of mischief. O cruel drowsing in this evil hour, here they sat in a great work they contrived." Lampedia, in her long gown, meanwhile, had borne swift word to the overlord of Noon. Lampedia is Helios' daughter, and she's charged with looking over the flock. "They have killed your kind." And the Lord Helios burst into angry speech amid the immortals. "O Father Zeus, and gods in bliss forever, punish Odysseus' men, so overweening or overproud. Now they have killed my peaceful kind, my joy at morning when I climbed the sky of stars, and evening when I bore westward from heaven. Restitution or penalty they shall pay, and pay in full, or I go down forever to light the dead men in the underworld. Zeus, you punish these men, or I will go to the underworld and light it instead. Helios is the sun god, so he is the one that raises the sun and then sets it. So if he refuses to raise it, the world will just be in perpetual darkness.
Who is that?
Helios. So he's threatening Zeus. Punish them, or humans shall never see the light of sun again. From Book 12. When Odysseus and his men set sail again, they are punished by death. A thunderbolt from Zeus destroys their boat, and all the men drowned. Only Odysseus survives. Exhausted and nearly drowned, he makes his way to Calypso's island, where we meet him originally in Book 5. Odysseus has brought us up to date. He can now rest and enjoy the comfort of Alcinous's court, but not for long. Ahead lies his most difficult task, reclaiming his own kingdom. At this moment of suspense, Homer might have put aside his harp until the next night.